All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Matthew Bullock. I'm one of the trustees of Natural Cambridgeshire, and I am the chair of this fund for nature that was being established by the mayor. It's £1 million. The purpose of setting up this fund was to encourage landowners, farmers and NGOs who wanted to develop new projects for nature and which would be sustained, wouldn't necessarily depended on grants, but would enable us to have sustained projects which we could finance on a kind of revolving basis, and which would enable us to make a dent in the landscape in Cambridge, which, as we know, has been very much depleted. And we wanted to double our nature in the county. So that's the kind of the overall idea. And part of the idea is trying to make sure that people who are thinking about doing these projects can be aware of the kinds of finance that is available, emerging in the green finance market, and also what preparation people can do for when they get that project moving forward. So the idea is to start with a range of speakers leading us through to a presentation at the end of the day by the Environment Bank about one of those projects, and I'll talk for a moment a bit about the kind of finance that's available from us in the fund. So that's the kind of the shape of what we're trying to say. It's quite tight. I've asked everybody who's speaking to speak for only 10 minutes and then to allow for 5 minutes of questions from the floor. I have a mascot, which is a rabbit, and this rabbit will reappear 2 minutes before the 10 minutes and at the 10 minutes, and then at the 5 minutes point, and then we'll move on to the next session. So when you see the rabbit, you know you've got to be, she's looking out for you and making sure that we keep on the time scale. On that basis, let me start off by talking a bit about the criteria that we have used in the fund, which we would provide those fundings. We're talking about a facility which we've made available through the mayor of up to £1 million, and this is a revolving facility which is to support nature, water and climate change projects, particularly nature, but with nature, with the emphasis, up to about £300,000 per project, but kind of some softness around that. And we are wanting to, if we can, make priority about those landscapes that we've identified as particularly important ones in the county, which are basically those around Cambridge, those around the John Clare, the Nene Valley, near the Huntingdon on the Ouse, and in the Fens, and then up in the area in the Clays, up behind Orwell, in that part of the west side of Cambridge. So those are priorities, but they're not exclusive. And if you have a project which is really good, bring it forward, and we will certainly look at it carefully. The funding that we're providing is capital expenditure. We do not want to use the money to pay money to lots of consultants or to revenue costs in terms of developing those projects. It's capital. So from that point of view, you have to have enough money available to get the thing going, but the capital is then available from us. And we're looking for a project which will also have got other funding come in from other sources. So, for example, it could be a grant that you have from somewhere else, that's fine. It could be a donation of land that you put in, which is stuck in there and will stay there for a long time. For farmers, it could include some SFI or some higher stewardship income that could come in on a stable basis to support it. It could include other investors, and it could, of course, include philanthropists. So that could make up roughly sort of the 2 to 1 that we'd be looking for. But we are hopeful that we will have contributions from outsiders. It is not just financed by us. We're looking for projects which will have sustainability once we've created it. so that they don't have to sort of turn around and look for more grants in order to, or other finance to keep the thing going. And there are two ways in which you can repay us, in the sense that one could be from capital receipts coming from things like BNG credits from developers. That's certainly an area which people have said quite obviously is an area they can introduce. But it could also come from income. It could come from flood mitigation payments, for example, if you're doing something with water. Or if you wanted to set up a visitor centre or some sort that was going to give you some income, that would also be an area that we could look at. The capital that we make available is interest-free for up to 7 years. If after you haven't managed to finance it, then you'll be interest charged after 8 to 10 years, and we'd expect to be repaid over that period. Our hope is that actually people will get repayments earlier than that, so that we can recycle it into other projects. If you're talking to your lawyers, the status of this finance that we would offer is senior debt. It would be unsecured, so we're not having a charge over the land, but we are requiring a pari passu and a negative clause and a negative pledge, and your lawyer will explain to you what that will be, but that just basically means that we're not left in some kind of limbo if things don't work out well. So those are the kind of the criteria, and we've got applications come in, and we will turn them around and try to divert any money that we're going to disperse it during the course of the summer. But we'll give answers, I hope, much smarter, and Helen will give you the details of the timelines for that. So that's the idea of what we have in mind. I've got a couple of minutes to ask any questions if anybody will ask me at this stage, or you can come back later on at the end of the session. So that's my first 10 minutes. Any questions wanted to raise at this stage? No hands? Yes? No hands?
No questions so far.
Okay. Well, is Martin on the line?
He is.
Martin, thank you very much for coming. So Martin is the chairman of the nature-friendly farming network nationally, but importantly, he is a farmer in Cambridgeshire and has been involved in doing projects in his farm. So we thought we would ask him to talk, first of all, why farmers might want to invest into a biodiversity project. Martin, over to you.
Lovely, thanks very much. And yeah, I think it's a great opportunity, this fund, and to help. I think farmers need help and sort of understanding how they could benefit and be part of it. If we look at the Cambridgeshire as a county, the majority of the landscape has predominantly been farmed. And if we look at the challenges farming face going forward of a changing climate and water levels and water availability, nature plays an important part in all of what we do as farmers. It underpins food production, and quite up until recently, and still many do, still believe food production is the primary and the only outcome farm landscapes produced. But as we see the diversity within our landscape, we are already that we're producing energy, flowers, food, other things, access to nature. And as our mindset decides to come back to see the reality and the need for nature in our systems that underpin our businesses, that kind of thought process of how do we make our businesses and landscape more resilient. And certainly for our own farmer here in Elsley, we're on heavy clay soil. We work with other farmers in our cluster, in our landscape, to see how nature fits in. So by investing and focusing on delivering more pollinators within the landscape, healthier soil, buffering water courses so we can avoid pollution, but also slow the flow of water down. So we can try and within our own farm landscape, manage water courses and water availability, and how do we store it? We've seen already the huge impact, the changing climate, and sometimes the loss of biodiversity, how it's already been affecting our landscapes. So as farmers, many farmers are looking to see how they can make their businesses and landscape more resilient. And it's only when we open up that thinking process is how do we collectively do that as a group of farmers? How do we collectively approach the challenges we face? Whether that's protecting some of our fenland soils, protecting our chalkland streams, managing flooding or the availability of water. Much of those activities will need to be done and can be done on farmland. And for many, it's helping farmers understand the opportunity that building more diversity into your landscape underpins and supports your farming business, but also makes you more resilient, and also sees the value of what you can have on your landscape in delivering those different outcomes. So we've really got to focus and help farmers that connectivity. They're not seeing farmers as may want to enter this fund as individuals, but how do we get the real value of collective approach? And that will need, I believe, for many farmers, needing support by other organisations and NGOs to lead the paperwork, to lead the charge. But we can offer areas of our landscape to have that connectivity and opportunity. And I think the opportunity is now. We cannot wait for the future and do action in the future. The stuff we produce and manage now will have the effect. And I think that's the opportunity currently through farming grant schemes, through SFI, ELM and HLS schemes, that we could get some primary funding combined with some capital funding to do additional items on that farm that gets the scheme up and running, and then we can approach or keep an eye on those opportunities through biodiversity net gain, lots of infrastructure, lots of development coming through Cambridgeshire. How do we make sure that funding can then be combined with this grant and other opportunities? Within Cambridgeshire, you have a local nature recovery strategy, and it's connecting to those objectives, those opportunities of funding that comes through. But also, we're also seeing an increased awareness within the farming sector, the supply chain, looking to support farmers in doing climate mitigation and nature restoration benefits. So there's a funding stream coming through the supply chain, but also there's philanthropic funders that actually, they've got some deep pockets and they actually want to leave a positive legacy in the landscape. So for farmers, there is this competing number of opportunities of funding coming to us, where we've predominantly only really focused on crop outcome or maybe some livestock and value, and it's trying to distill that down and then locking into those opportunities and using the available funds that we currently can get hold of to change those farming practices, changing the outcome of those landscapes to this fund and other funds that are coming down the line, so we can start taking action now as farmers, as landscapes. And I think the opportunity within this fund and sort of working together is having that landscape approach conversation. How do we also get those benefits of access to nature, connecting people up and using the access to nature within a farm landscape as a real positive approach? And how do we bring people along and connect those up? So I think that's part of what I think the opportunity of communicating this fund and the opportunities within it is, how can it fit in and we layer those different funding opportunities and not stifle opportunity for change going forward. And I think that's I think the opportunity for this fund is the communication, us as farmers and as stakeholders. How do we encourage other farmers to get involved and see it as an opportunity? And this fund may not be the catalyst that kicks it off, but it's the conversation it can start that will lead to other opportunities. It shouldn't be seen as, I think, just a fund for today. It's a fund for future, while we then look at that diverse income streams for the opportunity coming forward. And then we can really see our whole, our farm landscape as delivering much of those solutions society is looking for: a reversal of biodiversity loss, climate mitigation measures, healthy food production from healthy landscapes and healthy soils, feeding local people wherever possible, a seasonal and local system. So I'm going to keep the rest of this very short because I might really open up to questions, but I think there's a huge opportunity, but we just need to make sure the information is available to those land managers that are keen to look at this as an opportunity and give them the support of seeing how they can engage with it as individuals, but most likely as a collective approach within those pieces of landscape that have been highlighted that are those most best opportunities to get that funding. So thank you very much.
Martin, thanks very much indeed. That's great. Good entrance. And this point about working with farmers and the clusters, I think, is a clearly important part in which people are learning to find what the opportunities are and where exploring what SVI will do as opposed to sort of the high stewardship areas. Any questions for Martin or from me? Got 5 minutes. Tom.
Someone's got there. Yeah, Tom.
Hi, can you hear me there?
Yeah.
Hi, thanks, Martin. Just a quick one. Obviously, just thinking about sort of the payback that Matthew you talked about. The obvious route, as you mentioned, Matthew, was biodiversity net gain. Are we at a point where farmers can feel confident that that market will deliver, so that we are confident we can pay you guys back in 7 or 8 years? Are there enough examples out there of BNG locally within Cambridgeshire that are definitely paying back the sort of figures we would need to be paid back to cover the costs of natural Cambridgeshire grants?
Martin's question, it's a developing picture, but it's clear. It's quite clear that there's a lot of development in Cambridge area, and for example, East-West Rail. And I know Martin will talk to us. Martin Baker will talk in a moment. That there are some large infrastructural developments coming through, which will probably create some flow. People are obviously going through the process, and we've got Rowan in a moment talking about how that flow is going through the planners at the moment. But my impression from what I've heard in Cambridge planning area is that it's pretty busy in terms of looking at BNG projects. They haven't necessarily got through the process, but I know that there's certain farmers who are looking around and are looking at the register and the names of the kind of the projects which they think they could be earmarking. So I think there is that market is starting to develop. It's about, I think it's somewhere in the region of £30,000. It depends what unit you're doing, what you're developing, but the market does seem as though it's interested enough to make the money, but we'll have to learn, and that's why we've given it some time. We're not sort of saying it has to be done shortly, but obviously we'd expect over 7 years, roughly, we would expect people to be able to refinance during that period. Martin, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, if I can, and sort of as a farmer who's directly going to be affected by East-West Rail, it is having those conversations of not just having the BNG beside the railway line and putting the net gain there. Let's look at how do we move that revenue stream into the landscape and combine it with other revenue streams that can deliver the real benefits. So I think this can kickstart that conversation of let's not just put the nature where the infrastructure is. Let's move it, some of those benefits wider, and then stack other funding to it. So we could use this as a seed fund while we build those conversations up, while we wait for that infrastructure to come in a few years' time. That'll unlock that revenue stream to come back.
Yeah, and just we are perfectly happy to stack from the company from the fund point of view. We're not sort of counting out if you've got something else. We're very happy to have as many different streams as you can to exploit. Any other questions?
Yeah, we've got Rowan's got his hand up.
Rowan, sure, go ahead.
Sorry, I just thought it would be a good point to answer the question directly rather than wait until we get around to my presentation. So in Peterborough City Council right now, we've had 56 applications that require BNG, and an extremely rough estimate of the number of BNG units that are going to be required is about 75 over the last year. But however, I wanted to bracket that with some pretty big notes on that information, which is that a lot of applicants are still figuring out BNG. We've had a lot of applicants who do require BNG when they thought they didn't. We have a lot of applicants that don't require BNG when they thought they did. We have a lot of applicants who are trying to really pack the BNG on site, and we have a lot of applicants who are looking to go solely off site for BNG. So whilst we do have some numbers of very recent numbers of people who are going to require BNG units, from what I've heard in the industry, the off-site unit provision is being leaned towards as more preferable, because on-site delivery is not being as easy as it was thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, I just want to echo what Martin said just there, which is that when it comes to BNG, if you're delivering the habitat description and the habitat condition, as you have said you are going to deliver, it does not matter what else you do with that land. All that matters is that you match that habitat description and that condition assessment. If you then want to use that, if you do that through provision of an orchard, or if you do that and then have, I don't know, some other alternative land use on that site, so long as you match that description, it doesn't matter. So BNG isn't a sole revenue thing. Yeah, so I'm just mimicking what Martin said just there, but I'll be quiet now.
Excellent. That's great. Duncan, you've got your hand up.
Thank you. Yes, I just had a question going back to the first slide. You're saying about capital costs being covered, not revenue or consultants. Obviously, BNG, you wind up having consultants involved as ecologists doing assessments, so I appreciate that would not be applicable. But I'm just wondering, is there any definition on the capital costs? So are we talking about land, machinery, equipment? And is there a minimum level that you regard for capital, which is, we might regard a minimum of 5,000 for a capital item, but you may have a different threshold?
I haven't set a threshold, but it would be typically something that goes in and it stays there. Is typically what we're thinking of. Fence posts, excavating something. That's the kind of thing we have in mind, rather than what I don't want to do is have it going off to lots of bits of paper, as it were, into the land.
Thank you.
Right. Well, we're just about on time. Thank you very much, Martin, and thank you for coming along here. You're a great supporter of this, and we do appreciate all the support you give on this. And just this point that he makes about if you're on a farm, go out to cluster, go out with your colleagues and work out what you can do. It's what you can do so much more together than you can if you do it just one by one. Now, our next speaker is Martin Baker, who may well be known to many of you. Martin has been incredibly effective in the county in talking to lots of people about how they could develop biodiversity, and he was our first candidate under this fund. And Martin, you're going to tell us what you went in doing the first one and what was required and where you are now, possibly. So, Martin, over to you.
Okay, that's fine. Zoe, am I sharing screen with my presentation, or are you doing it?
So I've got it. Everyone should be able to see it.
All right, I'll have to do
give me a nudge and ask me to forward on the slide.
Old COVID presentation approach. Then when I do the next slide. All right, next slide then, please. So Fleam Dyke, site of special scientific interest and scheduled ancient monument, is one of the remaining areas of chalk grasslands in sort of south and east of Cambridge. The sort of three biggest areas are generally sort of ancient monuments: the Devil's Dyke by Newmarket, Fleam Dyke here, there's also Roman Road, and then a few small parish chalk pits and various road verges. The site itself is long and narrow, and there's a photograph here showing it sort of like its width, probably right away along the top and sort of hemmed in by arable farmland on either side. It is highly difficult to manage, and for years it's been undermanaged or not managed. There's perhaps just little bits of volunteer time now and then, every now and then capital grants. As it happens, it's owned, large parts of it owned by the neighbouring farmers, with the boundary going along the parish boundary, which goes either along the top of the bank or the bottom of the ditch. But 3 or 4 years ago, one of the adjacent owners decided that they didn't want to. It was too much of a challenge for them to manage, and actually, would we take it on from them? And at that point, the answer was no, because it's too difficult for the landowner. Actually, it was too difficult for the Wildlife Trust as well. It'd just be a money pit, frankly. However, with the advent of biodiversity net gain, we saw there could potentially be an opportunity to actually extend the dike to make it a more viable management unit to get sheep and other livestock on, and to make it worthwhile to clear the scrub and to restore and manage the chalk grassland. And the adjacent landowner came back to us again a couple of years ago, and at that point, I met them and their tenant farmer and said, "Okay, we're interested, but only if we can get a strip of land to undertake habitat creation adjacent to the dike to create a more viable management unit." And fair credit to the landowner and to the tenant farmer. I think the tenant farmer actually helped us persuade the landowner that that was the best option. So that was like really beneficial. And so we started the process of, all right, how are we going to actually afford to buy the adjacent arable land? Okay, biodiversity net gain could be an opportunity for us as a wildlife trust to not only fund the habitat creation and the infrastructure, but also help, in effect, to, I suppose, cross-subsidise the management of the very difficult SSSI and Scheduled Ancient Monument next door. So, next slide, please. This is just sort of high-level view of the sort of Cambridge Nature Network, sort of a long-term vision within which Cambridge would assist Cambridge in growing sustainably, identifying the best areas for nature recovery and nature-friendly farming in those coloured bits, whether it's the dark, deeper blue along the river valleys, the green on the sort of higher ground west of Cambridge, the purple and red of the sort of the fens, and the pale blue where Fleam Dyke and Roman Road and other sites such as Magog Down and Gog Golf Course and Wanderbury Country Park are located. So we're in the light blue area, the Gog Hills. Next slide, please. And zooming in, Fleam Dyke is in the top right-hand corner, top of the map, the northeast. Very narrow linear site, but it's got Fulbourn Fen to the north, and then and Wilbraham Fen a bit further on. But then going west, you go towards the Lower Valley Farm County Council Emerging Habitat Bank and the deep green bits in the centre of the slide, Wanderbury, Gog Golf Course. So that sort of gives a flavour for some of the remaining nature sites left in the area. And our proposals were aimed at making Fleam Dyke bigger, but also better connecting it in the landscape to other nearby nature sites. So rather than two relatively small SSSI sites, Fulbourn Fen and Fleam Dyke, the long-term vision working with the neighbouring farmers is to actually create one larger nature site set amongst the productive, continued productive farming. And so next slide. So the project involved obviously us acquiring the land, and we agreed on a 50-metre strip of the arable land to complement the dike itself, to create new high-quality chalk grass and habitats, and as we're going to be removing scrub off Fleam Dyke, to also include a component of new scrub habitats on some of the former arable land, important for some of the bird species that are in the area, like turtle doves and many of the warblers. In managing it long term, if we're going to have cattle or sheep and cattle grazing the land, then we clearly need the grazing infrastructure and a water supply. And also the project also rolled in the first phase of restoration on Fleam Dyke itself, though that is not funded from the Dublin Nature Fund as it's on the SSSI. And having bought it, we now have a legal obligation to manage that SSSI. So that is for Wildlife Trust grant and our own members' resources to put into managing that. So next slide, please, Zoe. So looking at the whole, and I mean, bear in mind a large chunk of this is actually restoration work on the Fleam Dyke itself. The overall project cost over the first 3 years run to £310,000. The deal we negotiated with the landowner was at a fair arable price, but with a discount for us because of us taking on the SSI management obligations on Fleam Dyke and getting the landowner out of their obligations on that. So we were able to negotiate a discount on the land price. Obviously, the habitat creation, we've got a bespoke chalk grass and seed mix, which is going in. We've got the fencing and water supply. So this image actually shows, again, looking down the Fleam Dyke, the land we're buying is to the right. So you can see two of the fields, and there's a sort of tatty remnant hedgerow in the middle distance. Up until this, our land goes up until roughly the second gap. So not the big first gap, the small second gap. Luckily, we've got Fleam Dyke pumping station on the left there, and we've been able to work with Cambridge Water to secure water supply off one of the pipes that leads in or out of the pumping station, and that will also help supply the Fleam Dyke itself. Yeah, and so we've done all the work to set up to create the habitats as of last autumn. The fencing went in over winter. Water supplies currently going in. And with this, we've also been talking to another adjacent farming landowners who's working with another relatively small farmer to actually diversify their business, and they're setting up a small grazing enterprise. And with them, we're making our land available for them to also start to build up their herd of belted Galloway cattle. And that's the first start. They've got much bigger aspirations, but it's helping to give them a bit of a kickstart and for them to test the water as well in having additional grazing land close by. We've done all the work to register the land as a habitat bank, to set up a Section 106 agreement for that habitat bank with South Cambridgeshire District Council. Those sort of legal costs and various administrative costs are also rolled into the project costs. And as Matthew Bullock said at the start, the loan is to be repaid from future biodiversity unit sales. We haven't sold anything, but the habitat only went in last year. We also have another small habitat bank just adjacent to Fleam Dyke, and that is nearly full. And that's just been in 1 year of selling biodiversity units. We've nearly sold about 20 odd biodiversity units there. We've actually at the moment we anticipate that the land we've got, that the former arable land that's new habitat, there's going to be about 50 to 60 biodiversity units available from that in creating the type of chalk grassland that we're creating. At the moment, I've got outstanding queries for the sale of about 12 biodiversity units that are currently, I've provided quotes for people, and I'm waiting for various planning permissions or those developers to secure their planning permission, or potentially they might, of course, go elsewhere because it's a market. But we are confident that within 3 years we will have sold all sufficient biodiversity units to cover the rest of our 3-year project costs and to pay back the loan to the Doubling Nature Fund. So that's the position we're in. I suppose in response to that earlier question about unit sales, it's been relatively slow to start with, but that's not unexpected because an awful lot of developments were actually, people are building at the moment, actually secure planning permission before February the 12th, 2024. So actually they didn't have a legal obligation to actually provide mandatory BNG. It's only just now that we're starting to see developments come through into the system which will require BNG. So I heard Rowan say about the 75 units, biodiversity units in Peterborough. I expect that will increase somewhat in the coming year and years. So that's where we are. I think that was the last slide, other than a few pretty wildlife pictures. If we just do the final slide. So what we're hoping to do is to create the new grasslands for chalk grassland with scabiouses, knapweeds, custard bellflower, orchids, start to spread out from Fleam Dyke. particularly aided as animals will move between the SSSI and the new habitat creation in the way that we've done the fencing. Wide range of invertebrates, whether chalk-billed blues, beetles, and moths. Hopefully there's going to be a good amount of pollinator habitat for a farming neighbour. And and also habitat for beneficial insects that may also be predators of farm pests on the arable crops that are still going to be grown next door to us. So with that, that's everything.
Martin, thanks so much. That's fantastic. Can I, a simple question, are you able to say what kind of typical price you got for a unit?
Isn't that meant to be commercially sensitive?
Oh, is it? Oh, I'm so sorry. But
no, I'm not got a problem with that. At the moment, for this habitat bank, so our first one was £25,000 per biodiversity unit. That will be the minimum price here at Fleam Dyke, but we are considering whether that will be £30,000 per biodiversity unit. So it's £25,000 to £30,000. We're still to make a decision there. But our first one was £25,000, so the one at Blackfield.
That's great. Thank you so much. Any other questions, please, to Martin? Tom.
Hi, sorry about my ignorance here, but with a biodiversity unit, I mean, the unit's effectively for creating natural habitat. What sort of time frame can lapse before people regard that not as a creation anymore? It's just been sitting around for a while.
So how it works, Tom, is in effect, in signing this section 106 and registering the habitat bank, there's a habitat management monitoring plan that goes with that. In effect, we are committing to create a certain quality of habitat and a set condition for that habitat. So, and that then goes into the DEFRA biodiversity metric to calculate the biodiversity units that you're predicting, and obviously take off what the baseline is, in this case arable land, so much less, and the difference is the biodiversity units that we have for sale. The metric is fiendishly complicated. I don't think it's necessarily the right place to try and explain, but basically the more difficult the habitat is to create, the longer it takes to create, you actually will create fewer biodiversity units per area. So for some high value habitats, such if we went for the top quality chalk grassland habitat, that's not going to be created before 30 years, realistically. The only way we're going to be able to afford to do that is actually to do it in a two-stage process. So we're creating a reasonably good grassland quality to start with at Fleam Dyke. We're not pretending we're going to create the best quality chalk grassland. In 15 to 20 years time, once we've done that and we're confident, we will then say, actually, we're happy to upgrade to the best quality chalk grassland. We'll have to redo our section 106 agreement, update our habitat bank register, and we'll have an extra number of biodiversity units that we would be able to sell in future. If we went for just chalk grassland now, straight off, which actually I just don't think ecologically is feasible on that arable land, but if we thought it was, the number of biodiversity units would be less than half of that 50 to 60 that we would create, because it's deemed difficult to create. And so if someone wants, but I suppose the principle of that is if we then had to charge £80,000 per biodiversity unit, which is what we would do to be able to get the same income over the lifetime of the habitat bank, who's going to pay that? Well, the only one who might pay it is someone who's actually gone and destroyed some decent quality chalk grassland, which they shouldn't do. So it's disincentivizing destruction of high quality habitat.
Martin, that's very helpful. Can I just say, Martin is in an absolute fund of information on this. So if you actually want to talk about how you create the metrics, Martin is the person that you farmers in Cambridgeshire should be talking to. He is just an encyclopedia on the biodiversity side of it. Martin, thank you so much for coming. I know
just say one thing, Tom. Please feel free to invite me to the West Camps Hundreds if you and your fellow farmer cluster want to hear more.
Will do, Martin. Thank you.
Now we're going to move on to the next piece, next speaker, if we can, who's Rowan Rumble. Rowan is from the planning side of things, about the creating of this agreement with the developer and with you as the farmer. So Rowan, over to you. Can I pass you through?
Brilliant. Thank you very much for the introduction. Yeah, I was invited to give this talk, and I was sort of thinking about exactly what I wanted to say and what I wanted to cover. And I think what I've decided upon is that I would like to arm everyone in the room with at least a very basic understanding of the steps that need to be taken from a planning application perspective, from an off-site delivery perspective, and from a local authority priorities perspective, so that when you, if you do decide to go down this route, you get an email from your person who wants to buy your unit saying, oh, our mandatory biodiversity net gain condition has just been refused. You have an understanding of exactly what that means. So hopefully, by the end of this very short presentation, I've got to go quite quick through overall, you'll have an idea of what all that means and all the different steps that need to be taken from all the different parties. So next slide, please. So from a local planning authority perspective, as I mentioned, there are three different aspects that local planning authorities will be interacting with biodiversity net gain. In the direct assessment of planning applications, in the Section 106 agreements given to off-site unit providers, if that is done in your local planning authority area, and then the individual local planning authority priorities that we just have as a group who want to support and improve and supply biodiversity across the county area. So from a planning application perspective, as Martin kind of alluded to there, biodiversity net gain is hideously complex. I'm not going to lie about that. There are loads of intricacies. There are a wide array of really difficult to describe habitat definitions and all the rest of it. However, it is designed to be a post-permission condition. So what does that mean? What that means is that during the planning application stage, the applicant doesn't need to have entirely got sealed down their biodiversity net gain requirements or how they're going to achieve the 10% biodiversity net gain or anything like that. They only actually have to supply that information after they've got planning permission. So while you might have a lot of applicants, if you are supplying units, while you might have a lot of applicants approaching you, saying that they're interested in purchasing units, you might not get a definitive answer of how many units they're actually going to want to purchase until quite far down the line after they've been granted planning permission and all the rest of it. Because there are 1,001 things that can change over that period of time that will change the overall number of units that they are required to get off-site. So, but one thing they do have to do, so when granting planning applications, what do I, as someone who assesses these planning applications, actually look at? Have they complied with the mitigation hierarchy? So within biodiversity net gain, there is this feature known as the mitigation hierarchy that basically says they need to prioritize on-site units versus off-site units. And I need to ensure that they have achieved as much on-site as they can before they go off-site. Now, without wanting to get into the complexities of it, there's a lot of reasons why you want to achieve very little on-site and go a lot off-site, and there's a lot of reasons behind that. But it may be that you have someone come to you saying, oh, I'm going to need 8 units, and then come back to you a few months later and say, oh, actually, I only need 6 because Rowan complained and I didn't supply enough units on-site as I thought I was going to have to, or the opposite way around. Have they completed their biodiversity metric properly? So everyone who is coming to you to purchase units should have a biodiversity metric that identifies the baseline units that are provided from their sites. This may be useful for you to ask and have a look at for a variety of different reasons, but it will give you a hint to like kind of what kind of units they may require and how many units they may require. Have they delivered the project in line with the local nature recovery strategy? Now, I'm not going to go into the local nature recovery strategy in any great detail, but generally speaking, it is a very high level idea of how habitats should be supplied across Cambridgeshire as a whole and the whole country, actually. And it will be looked at and considered both with off-site unit providers and planning applications. I'm going to try and speed up now. So when it comes to off-site unit providers, it's important to point out that the local planning authority and the local council as a whole, strictly speaking, doesn't need to be involved in the process of the delivery of off-site units in any way, shape or form. It is possible to go through the whole process of getting your units registered, getting a habitat management monitoring plan, and getting those units legally secured without involvement of the local council in any way, shape or form. I wouldn't encourage it, because having the local council aware of your site means that you're probably going to get talked about a lot more within circles with people who want to buy off-site units. But I'm just saying that is something that can be done through the provision of conservation covenants. Peterborough City Council does offer a Section 106 service where basically you say, I want to deliver biodiversity units on my site, and here's my habitat management and monitoring plan for how I'm going to do it. And Peterborough City Council steps in and says, okay, you sign a monitoring agreement with us where we go out to site and ensure that you are delivering those units, and we will give you the legal, assurance, Natural England, that those units are actually being provided functionally. Not all councils are necessarily going to give that service. From a local planning authority perspective, all local planning authorities want B&G units within their area. It's been widely established that, as once again, going back to what Martin said right at the start, that biodiversity is a massive benefit for amenity reasons, for flood protection, the list goes as long as your arm. So you will probably have local planning authorities wanting to help you to deliver these units and provide it within their areas. So it's almost always going to be a good thing to get the local planning authority involved in the process, because they'll be quite positive. And certainly if someone approached me saying they want to deliver biodiversity units, I would be more than happy to provide dedicated specialist advice, pretty much free of charge, because I see it aligning with the council's biodiversity strategy. Enable developers to purchase units easily locally. Yeah, okay. So I've kind of mentioned all that. So if we could go on to the next slide, please. So I included this. Hopefully we're going to be quite quick on this slide, but this is from a website called biodiversity-units.uk. This isn't sponsored by them, and to be fair, I haven't directly vetted these numbers, so I encourage you to go and do your own research. But here is a screenshot from their website, from their October pricing report, of the average biodiversity unit prices per habitat type within all the various areas. A lot of people are delivering other neutral grassland for a whole variety of different reasons for biodiversity in that game, which I won't go into. But I would encourage everyone to look at the supply levels as well. Now, it's worthwhile saying that not very many applicants are going to need lowland meadow units or are going to need watercourse units, but it does happen, and they are market niches that your particular sites may fit into. So whilst you may be saying, oh, I'm not sure this biodiversity net gain unit thing is entirely for me and the land that I particularly manage, it's possible if you have fresh water running through your site, or if you have woodland and forest, that you may have a niche provision of units that it may be worth just dipping your toes in that particular area. But I highly encourage that website, biodiversity-units.uk. Once again, not sponsored or anything.
We'll put the slides on. So we'll put the slides on so you can show
perfect. That. Yeah. Next slide, please. So what does it actually look like from a planning perspective to sort of go through this process? Now, once again, this is really quite complex, but as a very, very basic overview, the number of units required, I've kind of mentioned a bit of this earlier, so I'll go over this quite quickly. The number of units required identified either pre or post planning. So that's an important note, is that the number of units that someone may want to buy off you is likely to change over the planning process period. Approach off-site units to deliver units which cannot be delivered on site. As I've mentioned previously, again, I'm almost in favor of off-site unit delivery. If I'm going to draw a line in the sand, I have much more confidence in the ability for the people within this call to deliver genuine positive gains for biodiversity than I am an area of green space in the middle of a housing development that's, is probably not going to be managed properly, to be perfectly frank. So I mentioned the mitigation hierarchy, and it's meant to be provided on site as much as possible first. That's one of the complexities to that thinking. Agree a price and provide biodiversity management plan. Biodiversity monitoring plan details, bill of sale, and a habitat management monitoring plan. These are all acronyms that I hope everyone will get familiar with hearing as time goes on. Basically, the BMP is a document that outlines exactly how the development is going to achieve its 10% biodiversity net gain requirement. The bill of sale is the proof that they have paid you the money, that they have actually purchased the units from you, basically. And a HMMP, a Habitat Management Monitoring Plan, is an official document that you can download a template of from the government website. So feel free to do that for free. So feel free to do that if it's something that you want to look into. You will be required, if you're delivering offsite units on your sites, you will be required to develop a HMMP and provide it to everyone who purchases units from you. As a matter of course, if you are selling the units to an applicant within Peterborough, it's something we will expect to see as a planning authority. Units are registered on the Government Biodiversity Net Gain portal. That portal exists as a central repository of all biodiversity net gain units to ensure that units aren't sold twice, basically. That's pretty much the only reason why that exists, but it's a central repository. So once again, if you want to get a general idea of what's available in your area and whether there's an overstock of units or whether there's an understock of a particular type of units, that portal can be quite a powerful tool. The applicant provides all of these details that I've just discussed as part of a discharge of condition to the local planning authority. So this is importantly, post granting of planning application, this all gets sorted. Like once and all, line drawn in the sand, this is a post granting of planning application issue. And then the habitats are then officially within the system, they've officially been bought, they're registered on the government portal, and they have been secured for a minimum of 30 years, minimum being an important term there, because certain habitats, as Martin alluded to, are going to require longer periods of time to actually deliver the biodiversity, to deliver the function. There will be monitoring legal requirements in addition to that. So if you have land within Peterborough that you're interested in doing this, you will probably, and you've signed a section 106 with Peterborough City Council and not a conservation covenant with someone else, you'll have either myself or my colleague Fran Payne turning up on your site to check it all out. And then next slide, please.
We're getting close.
That's it.
All right. Right.
Any questions? Sorry, did I use up all my 15 minutes?
No, you did just about. No, I've got 2 minutes.
Any quick questions?
Any questions? I can just say it's clear this is a complicated process, and if people feel they want to have a session on this, we should perhaps have another longer session going through in detail, because people get more familiar with the way all the requirements of this. But it's just getting a fresher to get going with.
It's worthwhile saying that I have had 2 full-day training courses with the planners in Peterborough to cover all the fine details. So 16 hours of training for planners in Peterborough. It's quite a complex topic.
But we'll give copies of these slides back out so everybody can see what. And can I just say that with Martin, Martin Baker as well, we're also creating a list of potential sites that you can put in there, which will be connected in with the planners, that they'll know when somebody is saying, I as a potential farmer, I'm prepared to put this site in, and that I can go into this process that Rowan is talking about.
Brilliant. There's no questions. Thank you very much, everyone.
Rowan, thank you very much indeed. That's perfect timing. Superb. Right. To our next slide. So this is on to Glenn Anderson. Now, Glenn is a farmer himself in Norfolk, and he's created a very famous project called the Ken Wendling Beck. And Glenn, I think it's fair to say that you didn't just for BNG. This was a wider view of the way in which you got together a range of portfolio of funding, which we wanted to hear you take us through. That'd be very helpful. So welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, so Glenn Anderson, as you say, I'm a farmer in Norfolk. I actually grew up in a farm in Cambridgeshire and St Ives, where my brother still farms. So I'm familiar with your kind of area and landscape. And this is really just about talking through some of the things that farmers maybe need to think about in preparing for a nature project. So if you just flick on to the next slide. So this is based on our experience, but we also have a small consulting business now called Swallowtail, and we're working across a number of projects across the east. It actually covers about 500,000 acres now of various different projects, including sort of landscape recovery. So this is just a bit of a distillation of our learning to date. But I think the really important points are, why are you doing this? Is this financially driven? Is it about the environment? There's not necessarily, good or bad things about either of those. I think the Wendling Beck project was originally financially motivated. We're on really poor quality land up in Norfolk, and we wanted to drive some resilience into our business with BPS and subsidies going. I think it's become much more environmentally led as we've gone through the process, but I don't think people should be embarrassed about pursuing the finance element of nature and building sort of some diversification and some resilience into their business along the way. Succession and legacy is obviously an important part as well. We, as farmers, we tend to invest in the land, and it's really a multi-generational sort of family business, a bit of a lifestyle. So just consider all of the reasons that you're really wanting to go into a nature project. In terms of approach, you can go it alone or you can go as part of a collaboration. We always encourage people to look for scale within this. We think scale within nature is really important. But it comes with complications if you're working with other landowners and trying to build real landscape scale into these projects. And there are other mechanisms out there, such as landscape recovery, which could be a sort of an option or even a future ambition for different projects. And what's the risk as well? So, what do you want to create, but what are the risks of doing that? There's obviously risks to changing the business model, and it's trying to mitigate those risks as you go through that process. Location for nature projects is really, really important, particularly when you look at the funding side of things. So what's the land quality? If you're on grade 1 land, maybe you should carry on farming it or look for options around the sort of fringes of that. If you're on really poor quality land, that's where we'd advocate sort of taking marginal land out and making a better use of that and sort of rebalancing the overall system. Location is really important from a finance perspective. It might be that you're located to some big corporates. If you're looking for sort of environmental social governance funding, that can be really important. If you're thinking about biodiversity net gain, which we just heard lots about, being quite close to an urban centre to try and get those offsets under that mitigation hierarchy can be really advantageous. Other projects are in a nutrient neutrality zone, for example, which can give it sort of make it more investable and more attractive. Or you might be in an area of land where you're looking at peatland or peatland carbon or salt marsh or whatever it might be. So that location is really important in terms of whatever these kind of natural capital and ecosystems service markets might be. And then think about the support networks. So are you going into this with partners within the business, whether that's a limited company or a farming partnership? How does the family feel about this? Is if this is a succession business, everybody's really got to be behind these changes because they are really long term, and you're going to need some support in managing this and delivering this going forward. If you're looking at that kind of scale, maybe it's talking to neighbouring farmers. That's what we've done at Wendling Beck. It's actually 4 farmers within that project. So that can be really important, and talk to the local authorities, the environmental NGOs. You just heard from Martin, Wildlife Trust. We're a partner with Norfolk Wildlife Trust here, and we've worked with Martin on various projects across Cambridgeshire as well. People like the National Trust, or really WWT, any of the environmental NGOs are really good partners and support partners in these projects. And then obviously the arm's length bodies such as Natural England or the Environment Agency, really key. They will have information about your landscape, about your projects, about the priorities and species and things like that. So if you just go to the next slide, please. Wider considerations, obviously financial and legal is kind of critical. Really think about the opportunity costs. So what is it that you're giving up? How do you maximize and become most efficient from a business perspective around where you're looking at land use change? Think about long-term agreements. Some of these agreements are really long-term. So BNG is 30 years from the time that you actually complete the habitat establishment or the capital works. Nutrient neutrality can be 90 years. So really, really long-term agreements, and that can have implications from a tax point of view, a succession point of view, a land value perspective. You really need to go into this in the round and think through all of the pros and cons around this. Government policy is probably our biggest risk. It keeps changing. They keep moving the goalpost. There's a whole planning review going through at the moment with the Nature Restoration Fund, and we're really quite nervous about some of the things that are coming downstream around policy change, which are going to affect our project just after we've committed to a series of long-term agreements through Section 106 and conservation covenants. And then tax is a big one for landowners as well. It's obviously been well publicised around inheritance tax, but actually income tax and the way that these ecosystem service payments are taxed over the lifetime, and whether you can spread costs over, if it's BNG, can you spread income over 30 years, for example? These are really important accounting questions, which we don't have complete guidance on yet. Other stakeholders, farmers, NGOs, public sector organisations, private sector organisations. It's great if you can partner with local businesses, big corporates, if they're local, is fantastic. Also academic institutions. You've obviously got Cambridge on your doorstep there. They've got a fabulous environmental element to them, and gathering data and bringing in that academic experience is really important to these projects as well. And then don't forget the communities, local communities, wider society benefits, whether that's through volunteering, citizen science, access to nature, for health and well-being, etc. Really, really important part of making your project investable. What's the project got to offer from a habitat perspective, species perspective? What used to be there, the historic landscape, is really important. The LNRS, which I think Rowan touched on briefly, also really important in terms of the strategic significance of where the project sits within the landscape. And the maps are just coming through on the LNRS now, so you'll be able to see where your land holding fits within those kind of priority and strategic areas. And yeah, the society piece is really important if you can gather that up as well. In terms of nature markets, there's various opportunities for this. There's government schemes. We obviously know about elms, landscape recovery being the top tier of elm, but even SFI and stewardship, a blend of that within this. It doesn't have to be everything. Wengen-Beck is all private finance, but we've got other projects that are a real blend of, BNG, nutrients, UCO, SFI, really trying to kind of spread the bets around the different finance mechanisms and provide a little bit of risk management for those projects as well. We also have the compliance markets like the biodiversity net gain and nutrients, and then supply chain. I think Martin mentioned around the interest in supply chains, and then institutional investment around carbon. So if you flip on to the next slide. I'm quite frightened of this rabbit, by the way. It reminds me of Donnie Darko. Right. Just in terms of that step change process, so there's a kind of a sequence that you generally go through, and it doesn't have to necessarily be all of these steps in this order, but this is just our sort of project approach, which we've borrowed from Green Finance Institute. But understand the project, scope it out, identify the key stakeholders. Baselining early is really important, so understanding what you've got on the ground, whether it's carbon or biodiversity or whatever that might be. Also baseline the social piece, so understand how people are using the landscape, how they access nature at the moment, and where there can be improvements for that. modeling different scenarios is really important, understanding that blend and what that might look like for different ways of using land use change and the different finance mechanisms that go alongside that. A master plan is key, so understanding what you want to deliver on the ground, and you can build that up from a habitat map and understand different ways that you can finance that. There's also some tools around sort of optimizing different land use as well, and there's some new tech coming down the stream quite quickly. I think ADAS have a solution that they're looking at the moment who are on your doorstep. So, you know, what's the optimal use of land? Engage with investors or potential buyers, understand the market, and then obviously go through the due diligence process and the legal agreements, etc., which are not for the faint-hearted. But I think once you're on this path, by the time you get to those, you're kind of invested in the project enough to take that in your stride. Next slide, please. This really just sort of summarizes what Martin was talking about graphically, sort of understanding all of these different opportunities and markets for landowners. So you've got 5 broad kind of categories within here, and then public money in the middle. So the public money being generally the cap legacy pot, much more environmentally aligned now, and then different forms of blending that finance from private to public within that. So institutional investment, number of logos on here just at random, the people that are active in this space. At the moment, institutional investment is very, very aligned to carbon. So we can start to look at stapling carbon and biodiversity, but they're really underpinned by the carbon element. That's where they can generate a return on investment, which these guys want. You have compliance markets, biodiversity net gain, neutrality, those things which are generally underpinned by infrastructure developers. There is an emerging sort of water neutrality market in Cambridge as well. It's not quite there yet, but there's opportunities around water credits as well. The supply chain, which Martin mentioned, you know, lots of organisations really looking to invest in that. It's probably worth saying that nobody buys ecosystem services for nothing unless it's pure philanthropy. It's generally trying to invest in something which has a benefit to their business, so building resilience into the supply chain in this case. We also have, you can just see on the left-hand side there, various policies and TNFD, which is Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, coming down the line, which is a kind of a global framework for reporting on nature impact through organisations, which could open up a sort of a more voluntary biodiversity market, take the pressure off things like BNG, increase that market share slightly. And then various different platforms, a whole bunch of names on there, but there's other ones as well around, you know, these tend to be a bit of a blend of soil health, water quality, biodiversity uplift, carbon sequestration, packaged into a credit which can go forward for people to invest in. They're not quite there yet. There's not massive amounts of money changing hands, but there is some, and there's a couple of names on there that are doing some quite interesting stuff and are doing some deals in those markets. And then grants and philanthropy, I think, will always form a part. They tend to generally like to close the gap. So if you're within sort of 10, 15% within a project, these are the guys that can come in and make a difference, close that gap through philanthropic funding, and generally take all the credit for being last to the table in there. So if you flick on to the next slide. This is just a number of projects that we're working across the eastern region. So there'll be some familiar ones in there. We tend to sort of focus on sort of Norfolk, Lincolnshire, and then just into Cambridgeshire. But the Ouse Washes, you'll be aware of. There's a landscape recovery project there. There's an emerging project around John Clare countryside, which is Milton and Burley, and some landowners around there. Boothby Wildlands is a Nattergal project up in Lincolnshire, and then further north we've got Lincoln and Witham farming partnership, which is centred around Doddington Hall, doing some great work. Number of landscape recovery projects in there. RSPB are quite active at Fransham, another round 1 landscape recovery project there, I think. You then have sort of Constable Country, Waveney and Little Ouse, the Brecks, which is a massive project, which just goes into North Cambridgeshire, sort of 33,000 hectares, which we're we're actually working on as a consultant, West Norfolk and the Wash projects that are kind of contiguous, some amazing project opportunities in there. Sandringham involved in that one as well, and Ken Hill. And we actually chair that Wash project, and we're a strategic advisor on the West Norfolk one as well. And then a big project up at North Norfolk with Holcombe. You've got Wensum Farmers in the middle, which includes the Wendley Beck project, which is sort of a standalone pilot within there. Another one at Crown Point, which is sort of Trouse, just south of Norwich, and then an emerging one in the Broads as well. So the point being, massive amounts of work going on, huge opportunities, hundreds of thousands of hectares covered within those projects, probably £2 to £3 billion worth of potential private finance over the sort of the lifetime, 20, 30 years of those projects, and great opportunities for landowners to be a bit more creative, to think about how they use their land a bit more differently, and sort of build resilience into that model as well. There's the rabbit. Sorry.
He is certainly is.
I'm done. So,
but what a great. Sorry, you want to finish your last point?
No, that's it. I'm done.
Okay, well, it's fantastic. I mean, what you've done, Glenn, is fantastically is widened up people's ideas of the kind of range of finance. So we spent it off with BNG, but we're going to wider things, as you're saying, and this idea of getting these partnerships that bringing in different streams of finance is really fantastic, and it opened up, I hope, a lot of people ideas what you can start to do. Thank you. I'm going to stop because I haven't got any time to take questions at this stage. Again, the slides are going to be absolutely manna to people to have a look at the kind of different things. Can we move on then, finally, to Rory Hodgson, who's from Environment Bank, who's one of the financial institutions. Rory is part of a group, Gresham House, which is big investors in green projects. And Rory, you're going to talk particularly about the one that you've looked at in land acquisition relating to development of new habitats. So over to you, Rory. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. That was really interesting. So my name is Rory Hodgson, and I am head of sort of National Land Acquisition at Environment Bank. So we've been hearing a lot today about biodiversity net gain, and so I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of Environment Bank, who we are as the sort of leading provider of off-site BNG units nationally, and present a bit of an alternative option to what's been discussed previously. So I'm going to set out what we do at Environment Bank, what is a habitat bank, and how we work with landowners and farmers to achieve off-site biodiversity net gain. So my role as head of national land acquisition at Environment Bank is to oversee the onboarding of land nationally and take sites from initial landowner registrations right the way through to site design and to live habitat banks. So Environment Bank was set up in 2006 by Professor David Hill. David was a key ecologist who lobbied for more measures to prevent nature degradation and was instrumental in getting biodiversity net gain into legislation. So we are now the leading supplier of biodiversity units nationally, with 29 live habitat banks and many more in the pipeline to go live in the next year and beyond. So as we've detailed earlier today, developers must now demonstrate a 10% gain in biodiversity value after the development has been completed. And as Roland indicated, they should try and do this on-site, within the sort of site boundary. But where that's not possible, they can purchase off-site biodiversity units, which is the market that we operate in. So we're an experienced and growing team of land managers, ecologists, salespeople, marketers, and more who have a real expertise in the biodiversity net gain sector. As you can see from the map on the slide, we have a really good spread of sites around the country, but we are keen to expand this coverage and target sites in every local planning authority so that we can sort of advertise units to each local planning authority as locally as possible. So if you're a landowner or farmer, after hearing this, you're interested, I'd be keen to speak to you and to look at your land and to get you registered with a sort of free, no obligation review. If we go on to the next slide, please. So what is a habitat bank? Essentially, it's an area of land which we commit to uplift the biodiversity value of over 30 years. So they're large landscape scale projects which can range anywhere from 10 hectares up to 100 hectares or more. And what we aim to do is take areas of land with a relatively low ecological baseline and uplift that baseline so that we can sell that uplift as biodiversity units for off-site developer B&G requirements. Importantly, we commit to pay for these sites in advance and guarantee payments to our landowners for the full term of the agreement. The sites are not linked to a single development or a developer, so we can create them in advance and effectively bank the units and then can be sold as and when we get requests from developers for a certain type of unit. What this means is that our landowners do not share the risk in establishing the habitat bank. We could commit for setting up the site and paying it for 30 years and paying for the landowner for 30 years. And then for whatever reason, we could not be able to sell a unit. We take on that risk, so the landowner does not lose control out in that scenario. So essentially, it's a de-risked approach from the landowner, the farmer's point of view. If we go on to the next slide. And so, in a practical sense, and actually on the ground,
slide.
Oh, we're not moved.
Yep.
Yeah. What do our habitat banks actually look like? So essentially, we're looking to create a range of habitat types through the creation of new habitat and the enhancement of existing habitat. A key point is that our sites are agricultural in nature. So most of the sites will still be grazed by livestock or cooked for hay, but we try to keep them as agricultural as we can for a number of reasons, including taxation. The habitat bank design is developed in collaboration with the landowner and takes into account a range of factors. That can be the site environmental conditions. So, for example, if the land's got wet areas of land, that will be taken into account. What soil type is, what the soil nutrient levels are, what the topography is, and a range of other factors. We also take into account the sort of wide landscape. So we've spoken a bit earlier about sites of special scientific interest, local nature reserves. So we try to link in with those surrounding ecological features, ancient woodland, that type of thing. We try and connect up so that it has the most benefit for nature. We also look at local biodiversity targets. So we do a lot of work with local planning authorities so that we can target our sites in areas that they want to see nature enhancement. And we also, and this is probably one of the most important things, we take into account landowner aspirations, their management competencies, and their practicalities. So it's very important as we need to work with the landowner for 30 years on these sites. So it's essentially a 30-year partnership. So what we create, well, what the landowner wants to see and what management they can undertake to be able to manage that habitat for the next 30 years so that we can meet our targets in terms of the uplift of biodiversity. So typical habitat types that we could create will include things like species-rich meadows, maybe some mixed scrub, different pockets of woodland, ponds potentially if there's certain wet areas and the land lends itself to it. But it's all dependent on the site and the factors that I've just spoken about. So they're all bespoke and they're all led by sort of the ecological vision of what we want to do on the site, and also the number of surveys that we'll do. So we'll do species surveys, we'll get hydrological data, we'll get soil data, and local biodiversity priorities to really build that picture and make sure that the site is suited for where it is. Next slide. So what's our offer? Why would a landowner come with us essentially? So we take out a 30-year lease. So it's 30 years plus a couple of years for capital work. So generally that looks like as a 33-year lease term. What we'll then do is we'll then pay a landowner a rent for this initial lease, and then we'll sublet the land back to the landowner or a land manager chosen by the landowner for them to manage in accordance with a habitat management plan we create. And each year, once they do the management that is required to sort of maintain and enhance those habitats, then that could be things like cutting for hay, grazing it with livestock, we will then pay them a management fee. So essentially they get a rent and a management fee paid annually, and other bonuses and revenue share models on top of that. So we cover all of the habitat creation and enhancement works at the start of the lease. So there's no cost for things like fencing, for things like reseeding, for planting. We cover all of that cost. And then it's up to the landowner, with support from Environment Bank, to manage the land to achieve the habitat uplift. So again, once we've gone in there, we've taken arable land and we might have put it down to species-rich grassland, and we'll have done all the seeding works and the ground preparations to get it to that point where the grassland is established. And then it'll be a case of the landowner then taking that ongoing management, so cutting it for hay, taking livestock off and leaving it to have a rest period for a certain amount of the year, and then grazing it at certain intervals as well in a sort of set manner that we sort of set out in our habitat management plan. So in addition to the habitat creation costs, we also cover the cost of setting up the legal agreement. So we spoke earlier about the legal side of things, including a Section 106 agreement or a conservation covenant, which is a sort of other avenue to get sites onto the game site register. So we cover all that cost, but also that time. So the landowner, from their perspective, if they enter into agreement with us, all they need to worry about essentially is their management that they need to do each year to then get their rent and management fee. And we deal with everything else, including selling the units, which the landowner doesn't need to be concerned with. A key point of our model is the collaborative approach that we have with the landowner. So we very much look at our agreements as partnerships, and therefore keen to work with landowners who have an interest in seeing biodiversity improved on the land. We also offer flexible and attractive payments for the habitat banks, which are guaranteed for the lifetime of the agreement, with the landowner, again, removed from the liability of both creating the habitat and selling the units. We see it as a fantastic opportunity for landowners to put aside some or all of their land, continue to farm it, but perhaps in a less intensive way, and receive substantial guaranteed annual revenue to diversify their income streams. So again, if this sounds of interest to you, the sort of process of going through this is we can do a free, no obligation desktop review of your land. All we need is a red line boundary or an SBI number, and we can take that, do our sort of desktop review, and if we think it's suitable, we can then come out, see you, talk more through about the model, and do an ecological survey to see if we've got a baseline that we can enhance and therefore take on that site. And go forward with the live habitat bank. Next slide. Yeah, I think that was it. So that's
Great.
a bit of a whiz through on in terms of what we offer for Environment Bank. But yeah, conscious that it's 10 minutes goes pretty quickly. So if you've got any questions, I'm free to talk through anything.
Fine. And just an example. Here's an example of taking the thing off from the farmers. Glenn clearly gets fully engaged. As other farmers may want to do. So what I just try to bring home to everybody is there are a range of different ways of thinking about what you want to do with your land. But there is now quite a wide market emerging. I mean, this is quite an interesting one that you've done in environmental, but 30 years, basically you do a deal and then it's left with them and you manage it with them in a kind of collaborated way. Totally different from what Glenn was doing, which is actually kind of running it yourselves, Glenn, and bringing other streams of income. So that's really wide. And our idea, if I just come back to our original funding, is basically we have enough funding to get people into this game, into this kind of space. It gets them time, get going, and then you can refinance in a variety of different ways in the way we described, both with BNG or with this kind of deal or with the wider things that Glenn is talking about. Okay, folks. That's a very long, quick whistle tour. Helen, can you just take us through now briefly about what the process is as far as we're concerned on Natural Cambridge in opening this up to potential applicants, and then we will open up for other windows that we can open as a result of this webinar. So, Helen.
Thank you. Yeah, so I will be brief. The information I'm going to provide here is available on the Natural Cambridgeshire website. There's guidance for applicants and the expression of interest form can be downloadable there. But just to quickly run you through the timelines, we opened the call for large projects last week, the 4th of February. We've obviously today got this webinar where we hope to inspire you and others to put forward an expression of interest. Expressions of interest, the form, as I said, is available on the Natural Cambridgeshire website, or if you want to email fund@naturalcambridgeshire.org.uk, I can provide that to you via that means. We will we are allowing a sort of 6-week window from today for expressions of interest to come forward, and so midnight on the 24th of March is the sort of cut-off date for the current round, which is our second call for projects. Full applications from and just to the application form, the expression of interest form is very, very simple to complete. It's currently on one side of A4, and we ask for no more than 4 sides of A4 when you filled in all of the fields on that. But it's asked for very, very simple information, nothing too complicated at this stage. Just if you've got an idea, put it down there, get it to us. We can have a look at it. And if you've got any questions, you're not quite sure, we would encourage you to email fund@naturalcambridgeshire.org.uk, and then either myself, Matthew, or colleagues or can respond to if you have a question about eligibility. So from the expressions of interest, full applications will be invited in April to be received by the 18th of June. The full application form is, as you would imagine, slightly longer than the expression of interest form, but there'll be no surprises on there. It'll be all the sorts of things that you're used to providing for various schemes. Projects funding arrangements will be issued to those selected by 30th of September. Our undergoing of the first round enabled us to get a really good legal agreement together. So we have gone through that learning process, and I continue to go through that learning process. But we have got a robust agreement in place for the 7-year loan that Matthew was talking about earlier, with interest charged from sort of years 8 to 10. Projects, so ideally we would like to agree any agreements of those that are sort of get through to the very final stages by the 30th of September this year, with projects to begin work no later than January 2026. And as Matthew said earlier, we're looking for sort of a 3-year sort of lifespan for the initial sort of project to be covered by these monies. So that's really it from me. Any questions, fund@naturalcambridgeshire.org.uk, and they will be picked up, and we can respond to those.
Thank you. And a big thank you, and we've got just 2 minutes, from all the speakers. I'm aware that we've gone through this very quickly. A webinar is kind of just a way to make people realise what is out there. Through this kind of webinar, we've started through Natural Cambridge an understanding of the variety of options that people may have, and I will try to help and open doors for people. We have ours is kind of prime funding to get pump priming to get you moving forward, but there are a lot of opportunities to go for, and we through Natural Cambridge will build more relationships with suppliers of finance and other consultancy, so that you can know where you ought to start when you're about to do this thing. But we do want to just say, the point back to Martin, encourage you. It's a new market, and not everybody's sure what to do, but there's a lot of experience coming up right from the planners right through to the consultants and the financial people, and there is a lot of interest in this area to help. And I hope that this will encourage you to bring forward ideas. Just sketch them in if you are, and get them into the flow. And then when you go into the flow, you can see what kind of opportunities you have. She's now 3:30, as we said it would finish. We've had about sort of 50 people on this call, and I hope they found that of interest. And please follow it up, as Helen suggested, with the website that we've talked about. So thank you. I hope that's been informative. And again, can I just thank you all the speakers enormously for their keeping to the time. The rabbit is still here, but you've all kept exactly within what we wanted, and it's been fantastic. Thank you so much.